We have a nicely styled map. We have some points. Now let's show our customers what the listed properties look like. Street View imagery is one of the awesome features of Google Maps that's widely used and loved. In case you don't know, the world is big. Really big. You just won't believe how vastly, hugely, mind-bogglingly big it is. Street View imagery is 360-degree imagery of a huge number of locations throughout the world. The Google Maps APIs provide a service for obtaining and manipulating the imagery used in Google Maps Street View.
Now let's find out how we can get this imagery and show it in the info window so our users don't have to drive around to each building.
First, let's understand what makes up a Street View panorama. Obviously, we need to know what place we're looking at. For example, this is my favorite dessert place in New York City, Rice to Riches. They sell $7 rice pudding, but it's totally worth it, believe me. Next, we need the point of view. Do we want to be looking at this building from the east or the west? This is called the heading. Also, should we be looking down on the building or up at it? This is called the pitch. We'll need to define these things dynamically for each of our points. Let's dive back into the code. Okay, we're going to go back to our populate info window function that we created before. This function needs to do a few more things besides just creating a string to put inside the info window. The first thing we're going to have it do is create a new Street View service object. This service needs to get the panorama image based on the closest location to the marker, and it needs to find out which way to point the camera, the heading, and the pitch. Now, we could just create a panorama object with the position of the exact lat long of the marker. But what if there is no imagery for that exact location? Since we're smart, we're going to define a radius of 50 meters that it's going to look for a Street View image within. Now, we're going to use the Street View service getPanoramaByLocation function and pass in the position of the marker, the radius, and call our getStreetView function, which we'll define above. The getStreetView function is basically going to take that nearby Street View location and compute a heading based on the location of the nearest Street View and the location of our marker. In order to do this, we're going to use the Google Maps geometry library. We're going to load the geometry library when we load the API by using the libraries parameter. We'll talk more about this later. This will allow us to use everything within the geometry library. In order to compute the correct heading so that we're looking at our building from the nearest Street View location, we're going to use the compute heading function. When we set our panorama options, we're going to tell it that it's in the position of that nearest Street View location, and that the point of view that we'll be using is going to be the heading that we just computed, and a pitch of 30, which is going to have us looking slightly up at the building. We're going to actually create that panorama object and put it inside the info window at the div with the ID of Pano. If no Street View image is found, then we'll put information into that info window indicating that. Let's test it out. Awesome. Now we can show our users what their future new digs will look like.
We've covered a bunch of useful dynamic stuff so far. But what if you just want to show a simple image, a street view, or a non-dynamic map? You can use the same Street View imagery we were just working with and embed it in your site or app just like any other image. You can also use the Street View functionality without a map. You simply need to use a URL as the image and pass in the parameters we just discussed: the location, the heading and pitch of the imagery, and the size. We can use this in any image element in your page.
Similarly, if you just want to display a simple non-interactive map, you don't need to use the full JavaScript API. You can use the Static Maps API to do this more simply, and it will load more quickly for the end user. For example, if we wanted to show our users a list view of our real estate listings, they might benefit from a small thumbnail view of where the location is. We only need to create a static map image URL and specify a zoom level, center, and size, and optionally define some markers, info windows, or other items which will also just be part of the image return.
To learn more, check out the link in the notes. Let's take a short quiz on the material we just went over, and then we'll move back to the JavaScript functionality and show some awesome ways you can create geometric overlays on your map.